Very good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll be covering Unit 4 of Business Ethics and CSR. Unit 4 is Ethics in Business. We will be discussing different chapters. That is, what basically are we meaning when we discuss about ethics in business. We'll discuss individual factors in business ethics and leadership. We'll discuss about the organizational wrongdoings. We'll discuss what basically is ethics at workplace and moral muteness, the ethical issues in relations between government, civil society organizations. We'll also discuss about civil society organizations and the businesses that we perform. We'll discuss about globalization and business environment, business and government relations. We'll discuss also about business and civil society organizations and changing ethical mandate of the business. Now, when we are discussing about business ethics in the era of liberalization, privatization, and globalization, we are basically highlighting the point that the late 20th century has marked the onset of LPG, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalization, which has transformed the corporate landscape. These forces extended the reach of corporates beyond their domestic markets and especially in the post-Cold era. The disintegration of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall ushered in an unprecedented wave of economic globalization. So, despite previous periods of globalization, the scale and magnitude experienced in 1990s were unmatched. So there are different important challenges and opportunities experienced in the global market after globalization. So with globalization, corporations faced a multifold expansion of stakeholders, creating complexities in the stakeholder management. The entry into the foreign market required adapting to diverse social and cultural norms, demanding business operations to be conducted with heightened sensitivity. So, rapid technological advancements, especially in communication, further complicated this landscape. The emergence of mobile technology, also the internet and the social media, meant the corporate actions could quickly impact the global brand reputations. Now, coming to the ethical boundaries in a competitive environment. Now, what it suggests that when there was the economic deregulation led to the increased competition and a push for foreign investment in the developing countries. Corporates again struggle to balance between the ethical boundaries and the profit maximization because if they are not balancing, their businesses will not be sustainable. Now, there were issues like sweatshops, advertising, and marketing ethics that highlighted the legal and social obligations of firms in a globalized, uncertain environment. So, these developments rekindled the debates on business ethics. The different important components of business ethics management, as put forwarded by Crane and Matten, where the components comprises of first and very important thing is the vision and the vision or the value statement. So the vision and the value statements are basically the broad declarations of a corporation's aims and values. For example, we have the Google, which his motto is do the right thing. IKEA's vision is create a better everyday life for everyone. Simplest tagline for us, the final measure of our success is a simple curve, the smile of health regained. While common, the actual impact of mission statement on an organization's ethical climate is debatable. Second one is the code of ethics, which emphasizes, professional integrity and employers' expectations. However, they are criticized for being one-sided and focusing on the duties while remaining vague about employees' rights. Third is reporting and the advice channels. Now, these are crucial for detecting and in resolving the ethical issues. So, organizations are innovating to maintain anonymity and encourage reporting, such as setting up hotlines for ethical grievances and internal complaints committees for issues like workplace and sexual harassment. Fourth one is the risk analysis and management. It comprises of the social and the financial auditing that has encouraged the corporations to incorporate ethical perspective in risk management. Next is the ethics and the vigilance officers and the committees, the appointment of role like chief vigilance officer or chief ethical officer has signified the growing importance of addressing the organizational ethics. So some firms also engage in professional ethics consultants to avoid the conflict of interest and biases. Next is the ethics education and training. The complexity of the modern managerial decisions has led to the incorporation of ethical training workshops in the organizations for the management team, so that they can understand the importance of the ethics to be incorporated, and it can be well incorporated effectively without compromising on the duty part. The individual can implement the ethics. So along with the businesses, through this education and training, ethics can also be incorporated in an effective way. Next is the financial issues that are related to auditing, accounting, and reporting. The corporations are adopting widely prevalent accounting and auditing standards to measure, evaluate, and communicate their impact on social, cultural, and environmental issues, thus affecting the stakeholder well-being. So these components collectively underscore the multifaceted approach that is required to manage the business ethics effectively in a globalized economy. These components are very important because in order to sustain your businesses, you have to manage the things properly so that you can address the economy, or you can address the global economy. Now, there are different important individual factors that are to be taken into consideration in business ethics and leadership. The first and very important thing is the ethical breakdown. First and very important thing is the ethical breakdown in corporate organizations. When I'm talking about ethical breakdown in corporate organizations, it is often perceived as the direct consequence of an individual behavior. However, it may not be the case. So you may say that reality is something complex, because when we are talking about ethical breakdown in corporate settings that are influenced by various factors, which is beyond the individual managerial conduct involving internal and external stakeholders. Now we have the IBS, that is the Individual Business Organization and Society Framework for Understanding Ethical Breakdowns. Now it helps in understanding this framework helps in understanding the complexities of the ethical breakdowns by considering different important factors. The first important factor is the individual factor. The individual factor comprises of the personal factors that here we will be discussing about personal morality versus professional ethics, CEO or senior management influence and stress, defective reasoning due to positions of power, and then we have the short term orientations and pressures to maximize the shareholder value. Second important factor is the business organization factors. The business organization factors comprises of the factors that is related to the organization. It can be organizational structure and the ethical climate. It also comprises of decision making processes. Decision making processes can be again centralization and decentralization, and there is influence of the board of directors, senior management and employees, and it also comprises of ill-conceived goals leading to motivated blindness and ethical fatigue. Next important factor is the societal factors. When we are talking about the societal factors, it includes the factors relating to the society. It comprises of again the government regulations, rules and regulations that are being framed, and the different important regulatory agencies which are operating, the civil society organizations and the media scrutiny, the societal expectations that every society is having, and the norms that one has to follow in the conduction of the business. Now we'll discuss the different important case studies of different ethical lapses in different companies. Now what it is trying to say is, though we are very much aware that we have to incorporate ethics, we have to be successful. In order to become successful, we can be successful, but without ethics it will not be a good one. So what we do now, we go on doing the work, but while doing the work or while doing the activities of the businesses, we should not forget the ethics. So there are certain important examples wherein we can identify how the companies have experienced ethical lapses. For example, the first one is the Satyam Computer Services. The former CEO, Mr. Ramalinga Raju, who was once a role model for his ethical leadership, was engaged in unethical practices. It is an example of personal morality conflicting with the professional ethics. Now, second important case is with the Enron. The late CEO Kenneth Lay, known for his religious and principled life, made decisions leading to Enron's financial and ethical bankruptcy. It demonstrates the influence of why it happened, because of the influence of stress and defective reasoning on the decision making part. Next important case we can discuss about Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal, where there is involvement of senior management, including the then CEO Martin Winterkorn, in unethical practices to maximize his profit. So it illustrates the impact of toxic ethical climate and centralized decision making. So these are some of the examples we can take into consideration where we have experienced the ethical lapses. Now we'll discuss about what basically is organizational wrongdoing, and organizational wrongdoing is normal or abnormal. We'll again discuss now. Now, traditionally, when we are talking about organizational wrongdoing, it was seen as an exception. However, researchers like David Palmer argue that it is a normal occurrence and not an outlier. So, this perspective suggests that ethical lapses are ingrained in organizational practices. Ethical lapses are ingrained in organizational practices and culture. Now comes the role of the senior management. What is the role of the senior management? It plays a crucial role in setting ethical tone. A crucial role in setting the ethical tone of an organization. as an open organization culture, as an open organizational culture that encourages discussion of ethical issues tends to have a better ethical climate. So managers often face significant tensions in decision making, where the manager has to balance between personal morality and professional ethics, individual interest versus community interest, short term goals versus long term goals, corporate loyalty versus corporate greed, arrogance versus error in judgment. And these things, becomes very difficult. When these things come into picture, it becomes very difficult for a manager to balance. Now, next important thing that we can throw light on this organizational wrongdoing that comes into picture is while discussing about leadership and ethical decision making. Now, when I'm talking about leadership, when we are talking about leadership, we see both plus and minus. We see both positive and negative consequences when you become a leader. So leadership involves influencing the ethical climate of an organization, and then inspiring the employees to make critical ethical decisions. So managing is about imposing order through planning and organizing, whereas leading involves coping with the changing environment and making the environment moral such that morally sound decisions can be taken. So in today's fast-paced world, the effective leadership requires navigating ethical challenges and then fostering the environment that can support ethical decision making. So ethical breakdowns in corporate organizations are complex and multifaceted, and it is influenced by different factors like individual factors, organizational factors, societal factors. So adopting the IBS framework will help in understanding the breakdowns comprehensively. So senior management's role here is setting the ethical tone and fostering an open organizational culture such that we can go for ethical decision making. Now coming to what basically is organizational wrongdoings. Now, when we talk about organizational wrongdoings, we talk about the ethical scandals that are being experienced in the corporate organizations. Now, what are these ethical scandals? Now, there is a tendency to attribute ethical scandals to individual manager failings. However, the reality suggests that these issues are often rooted in the broader ethical climate of corporate organizations. When a particular leader or when a particular manager fails, the people get this failing associated with some things which he has not done ethically. Now, people say that because he was not ethically correct, he has fallen into such and such problem. So, this is the tendency of the individual being. Now, we can also highlight this by understanding the traditional versus modern perspective of organizational wrongdoing. Traditionally, organizational wrongdoing were seen as rare, that is believed to be infrequent events. Previous aberrant, that is considered deviations from the norms are nothing but the rules and regulations. Aberrant, that is viewed as morally repugnant from a managerial perspective. It is attributed to toxic culture, that is blamed on inherently bad organizational environment. So scholars have attributed this wrongdoings to as bad apples, that is the individuals who are inherently unethical, and bad barrels where organizations were inherently toxic, having toxic culture. So there is a critic by Donald Palmer. Now he suggests that in the new perspective on organizational wrongdoing, there are different important traditional assumptions. What are the assumptions? Now, wrongdoing is not rare. That is, organizational wrongdoings are underreported, creating a false impression on rarity. Or the wrongdoing is not aberrant, which means major scandals like Enron, Qualcomm, and the subprime crisis are not just irresponsible activities but systematic issues. Wrongdoing is not due to bad apples. Bad apples means individuals who are inherently ethical. Wrongdoing is not that. It doesn't happen like that. Many corporate professionals who are involved in scandals are ordinary people, more and not inherently unethical or psychopaths. Wrongdoing is not solely due to toxic culture because organizational functioning often integrates unethical practices, making them a part of the system rather than exceptions. So there are different important factors contributing to organizational wrongdoing. According to Palmer, what are there are four important factors which can be included as or as which can contribute to organizational wrongdoing. The first one is the power structure. When I talk about the power structure, I talk about the highly centralized organization where decision making is centralized and it becomes bureaucratic and top down. That is however the top management says we are going to adopt. Now, middle and lower level management have very little autonomy and moral stress builds over time. So, as a result of which, moral stress builds over time because we have to adhere to whatever the top management says. There is lack of internal whistleblowing mechanisms that exacerbates the issues. Second important element is the administrative system. Now, when we are talking about the administrative system, we are pointing on the point. We are on the point that decision making is left to the senior management with lower level dissent discouraged. Organizations like Volkswagen during the Dieselgate scandal exemplify this structure. Now, next is the situational social influence processes. Decentralized organizations with open discussions with the people and ethical problems like Johnson and Johnson under James Burke reduce unethical actions. When you are pressurized, when you are morally, pressured, you go on doing the activities which may not be acceptable ethically. But when the situation, when there is decentral organization, open discussion takes place between the people, ethical climate generates. Centralized organizations also suffer from pyramidal politics where power is concentrated at the top, thus creating fear and insecurity among the people. Among the people means among the employees. Next is the accidental technological systems. When we are talking about the accidental technological systems, we are talking about the advancements that can unintentionally facilitate unethical behavior in the organizations if it is not managed properly. Now, coming to what basically is centralized and what basically is decentralized organization. When I talk about the centralized organization, I talk about different important factors. The first one is the bureaucratic culture where power is concentrated at the top, but from the middle or the lower level, you are not allowed to go for decision making. You are not being given any power to go for decision making because the decision making is vested on the top management. Now, there is also an MBO system which is called as management by objective system where the chain of command from the CEO to the lower level manager. Whatever the management decides, you are bound to apply. Next is in the centralized organization, there is fear and insecurity where employees lack moral courage to speak out, leading to moral stress and thus involving oneself in robotic performance. However, the boss says you are bound to do. In what much number of time the boss says you are bound to give the work done. You have to go for work done. Collaborative cheating, it also leads to collaborative cheating. Employees face the dilemma of participating in unethical practices or resigning. Now, coming to the decentralized organizations, it is just opposite to the centralized organization where we have the open ethical climate, which helps in encouraging in decisions or discussions and debates on ethical issues. There is reduced unethical action which is it is more conducive to ethical decision making. For example, Johnson and Johnson's revision of their mission statement under James Burke, leading to a more ethical corporate culture. Now we'll discuss about what basically is ethics at workplace and what is moral muteness. When I talk about moral muteness, I talk about muteness in the sense that according to Frederick Bird and James Waters, in their article, they suggested that moral muteness of managers investigate why managers often avoid discussing on morality at the workplace. They just avoid. They categorize the managers based on the congruence between their speech and actions and explore the regions and impacts of this phenomenon. There are different types of managers based on the moral congruence. According to Bird and Waters, Managers can be categorized into four distinct types. First one is the morally congruent managers. First one is the morally congruent managers. Here, there is consistency between what they speak and what they do, and actions and speech are aligned with the moral principles. They are called as the morally congruent managers. Amorally congruent managers, where there is consistency between amoral speech and action. Both speech and actions do not match or are devoid of moral considerations. Third one is the hypocritical managers, where there is lack of agreement between whatever you speak and whatever you do. You speak morally, but you engage in immoral activities. Now, next one is the morally mute managers, where the managers act morally but do not speak about it. They avoid using a moral turn in verbal interaction. So when we're talking about the types of managers basing on the moral congruence, it can be of four important types. One is morally congruent manager, second is amorally congruent manager, third one is hypocritical manager, where there's lack of agreement between speech and actions, and the last one is the morally mute managers. That means they act morally but they do not speak about it. They avoid the moral tone in the verbal interactions. Now we discuss about what basically is moral muteness, but now we'll discuss what are the reason for this moral muteness. So Bird and Waters identified the different important reasons why managers are engaged in moral muteness. The first and very important reason why managers go for moral muteness is to avoid conflict. Managers avoid moral discussion to avoid conflict, such as your morality versus my morality. So, more discussions might impact the workplace efficiency and create a vitiated environment. Second is pressure and security. The managers are under constant pressure. The managers are under constant pressure and microscopic observation. Avoiding moral discussion will reduce additional scrutiny and potential conflict. Now, what is the impact of this moral muteness on the organizational culture? The impact of moral muteness on the organizational culture includes the creation of a moral amnesia, that is, forgetting the moral principles and ethical standards over time. After a particular period of time, you forget what is morally correct and what is morally incorrect. Then how is this? Now moral considerations become less prominent in the decision making process. Next is inappropriate narrowness in the conceptions of morality, where there is limited and restricted views of what constitutes moral behavior. Ethical considerations are not integrated into broader organizational practices. Next element is the moral stress for the individual managers, wherein the manager experiences stress. Manager experiences stress due to internal conflict between their moral values and the lack of moral discussion. Moral stress can affect job satisfaction, job satisfaction and overall well-being. Next is how we can, what is the result of neglect of moral abuses? There is failure to address or recognize moral abuses within the organization. Ethical issues may go unreported or unresolved, thus leading to what will happen? It will lead to toxic work environment. If you go on doing it without understanding what basically you are doing, it will lead to a toxic work environment. There will be decreased authority of moral standards because no one will be there to incorporate it. So there will be erosion of the importance and the authority of the moral standards, moral principles, which are not enforced or respected within the organizations. Now we'll discuss the next important part, next very important part, that what are the various important ethical issues between the government, the civil society organizations and the businesses. Now, external stakeholders all impact a lot on business ethics. Beyond individual and organizational issues, external stakeholders such as we have the government and the civil society organizations also play a very crucial role, very important role in shaping the business ethics, because these entities influence the corporate behavior through rules, regulations, advocacy, public accountability mechanisms, so on and so forth. So what is the government role in business ethics? When we are discussing about the when we are discussing about the government's role on business ethics, we are basically discussing on the point that the government occupies a complex position in its relationship between the society and the businesses, and it suggests that it must balance promoting both economic growth and ensure that social welfare take place. So this can happen again through economic dependency and promotion. The government rely on businesses to provide employment to the people and thus stimulating the economic demand. They also promote the businesses through tax concessions, SEZs, and subsidies. Now, now coming to the regulation and accountability, to avoid the acquisitions of crony capitalism, the government must regulate businesses to prevent unethical practices. When we are talking about the legal regulations that are to be introduced to curb rampant profit making, that means that the rules or the laws will help us in checking that how the companies are only concentrating on profit at the expense or at the cost of social welfare. Next is public accountability. In the democratic societies, the governments are accountable to the elaborate, which demands transparency and fairness in dealing with the businesses. So public skepticism towards corporations compels the state to ensure ethical governance. Next is the corporate influence on government. The corporations exert significant influence on government policies and actions, often raising to ethical concerns. Next is the interest and the pressure group. The corporations form alliances with other players to create interest and pressure groups. These groups influence the government policy making in ways that benefit their interest. Next is lobbying. When we are talking about lobbying, means corporations lobby the government officials, legislators, that is the lawmakers, and the politicians to shape the policies in their own favor so that they can work in their own way. It might be ethical, it might not be ethical. So lobbying efforts can lead to regulations that can prioritize corporate interest over the public welfare. Next is the political donations. Corporate donations to political parties influence electoral outcomes and policy making. This practice of the government or of the political parties raises a ethical concern about the fairness and integrity of the political processes. Next is the revolving door phenomenon. In some countries such as US, the top corporate executives are appointed to the government positions and vice versa. The revolving door creates the potential conflict of interest. It creates a potential conflict of interest as former industry leaders may favor their previous former industry leaders may favor their previous employers while in the public office. Now, what basically are civil society organizations? Now, when we are talking about the civil society organizations, it includes the non-governmental organizations and advocacy groups that play a very critical role or crucial role in promoting business ethics. So, when we are talking about the advocacy and monitoring, the civil society organizations advocate for ethical business practices and monitor the corporate behavior. Monitor the corporate behavior. They highlight the unethical practices and pressurize companies to adhere to ethical standards. When we are talking about public awareness, civil society organizations also raises public awareness about corporate misconduct, thus influencing consumer behavior and accountability. Now, coming to the collaboration and partnership, civil society organizations often collaborate with the businesses to develop and influence ethical guidelines. Now, these collaborations or these partnerships can lead to more sustainable and responsible business practices in the long run. Now, coming to globalization and business government relations, how this globalization has impacted the business government relations. Now, first we'll discuss about the evolution of this corporate influence and ethical issues in globalization. Now, pre 1990s, the government there was a government monopoly on economic policy. So it is suggesting that before 1990s, the government held a monopoly over the economic policy making, regulating the corporate sector tightly. Corporations were largely dependent on the government to take the decisions, to take their favors, such as subsidies, licenses, protectionist measures, so on and so forth. So this era, that is the pre-1990s, saw a clear power imbalance where the state has the dominant factor or dominant state plays the state was the dominant actor in economic affairs. Now, there was shift in power dynamics post 1990s with the advance. Now, what happened at that point of time with the advent of globalization, there was significant effect in power dynamics between the government and the corporates. So there were several factors that contributed to the shift. The first one is the economic liberalization. The government around the world began to adopt liberalization policies, thus reducing their regulatory grip on the corporate sector. So this shift allowed the corporations greater freedom to operate, innovate, expand without any stringent government control. Now, there were growing civic awareness and media expansion. With the increase in civic awareness and expansion of the media, it led to more vocal demands, both from the industry and the civic groups. There was exposure to regulatory practices in other countries, further empowered these groups to negotiate more assertively with the government. Next is globalization and the corporate dominance. The globalization blurred the state boundaries, making it easier for corporations to operate transnationally. The corporations emerged as dominant players. The corporations emerged as dominant players in the global economy with significant influence on trade and investment decisions. Next is what is the influence of these international bodies? Now, the establishment of these international bodies, like say we have the WTO, World Trade Organization, also introduced new policies that can further reduce to that further reduce the state control over the economic activities. Now, globalization blurred the state boundaries, making it easier for the companies to operate transnationally. So corporations emerged as the dominant players in the global economy, where there was a significant influence over the trade and investment decisions. Now, there were also trade-related policies. These trade-related policies, such as abandonment of agriculture subsidies and implementation of trade-related intellectual property rights, that is the TRIPS, and trade-related investment measures, that is the TRIMS, diminish the power of the state to regulate the economies independently. So these policies again facilitated the free flow of goods between the countries, free flow of goods, services, investments, thus empowering the corporations to operate globally with very fewer restrictions. The growing influence of the corporations in the globalized era has led to several ethical issues. The first one is the transnational withdrawal and negotiation power, where the corporations often leverage their ability to withdraw investments as a negotiation tool, influencing terms of trade and investment in their favor. So this power imbalance can lead to agreements that are unfavorable to developing and underdeveloped countries, as a result of which what happens, resulting in human costs such as poor working conditions in the sweatshops. Now, collaborations with authoritarian regimes in pursuit of the profit, some corporations collaborated with the authoritarian regimes, compromising on ethical standards. So, these collaborations, what happened? It raises concern about the human rights violations, labor exploitation, and environmental degradation. Now, what happened in the sweatshops and labor exploitation? The quest for lower production cost, the quest for lower production cost has led many corporations to establish operations in countries with lax labor laws, leading to sweatshops. So workers in these sweatshops often face poor working conditions, low wages basically, and lack of basic labor rights. Now, what is the environmental impact? The global corporations sometimes bypass the environmental regulations, like say pollution. What are the things you have to keep in your mind when you are undertaking or when you are carrying out with your manufacturing process? How much pollution how much smoke one machine can send to the environment. These things again comes into picture when we are talking about the environmental impact. So it suggests that the global corporations sometimes bypass these regulations by operating in countries with lax environmental laws, thus leading to significant employee. What will happen if you don't adhere to whatever is being said? It will lead to environmental degradation. Now, coming to what basically are the businesses and the civil society organizations, there are challenges in the stakeholder. It takes into consideration the different important challenges in the stakeholder management and civil society organizations. The corporations face a significant challenge in identifying the legitimate civil society organization that can genuinely represent critical stakeholders. The primary concerns include legitimacy of civil society organization, wherein we go for determining which civil society are credible and which we can represent. The legitimate voices of the stakeholders are also taken into consideration. Now, there is assessing of authenticity and reliability of civil society organizations through their claims and the actions that are being undertaken. Now, judging the tactics and the intentions, there is distinction between civil society organizations that use attention-seeking tactics and those genuinely, advocating for the stakeholder consent. So, evaluating whether the actions of civil society organizations are driven by genuine issues or promotion. So the process of evaluating the civil society organization is often influenced by subjective interpretation. So especially in the context of globalization, where MNCs and navigate complex social and cultural landscapes, key issues are being included. What are the key issues? The first one is the extended community of CSO, that is the civil society organization. So what happens? The MNCs must engage with a broader range of civil society organizations, including those in the specifically international market. So MNCs must engage in the broader range of civil society organization, including those in the international market. There is lack of familiarity with the local social and the cultural norms can complicate the decision making and ethical considerations. Next is the cultural sensitivity. Understanding and respecting the cultural ethos of different regions with whom you are operating is crucial to building the trust and effective stakeholder management. So ethical dilemmas may arise when corporate practices conflict with local values and practices. So you have to take care of it. So one of the important consensus area in the relationship between businesses and civil society organization is the debate over the nature of economic globalization. There are different important issues that arise in this context. The first one is opposition to globalization, because civil society organizations view globalization as capitalist endeavor that prioritize only on profit over social welfare and often leads to exploitation of the people. The civil society organization challenge the fairness and equity of the global economic system, thus advocating for more sustainable and inclusive practices. Now the this is the opposition to globalization. Now the how this globalized civil society organization operates as globalization expands. CSOs themselves have become more globalized, thus forming networks and alliances across borders. This globalization of civil society organization introduces new points of tension and conflict in their interactions with the corporate organizations. The interactions between the corporations and the civil society organization during globalization bring several ethical dynamics to the front. What are they? The first one is there is transparency and accountability. Corporations must be transparent and accountable for whatever things they are doing with the civil society organizations, ensuring that their actions are aligned with ethically standard. Building this trust with the civil society organization requires openness, willingness to address legitimate concern. Second is collaboration versus confrontation. Funding balance between collaboration and confrontation is the key to managing the relationship with the civil society organization. Because if you can manage well, you can carry on with the things well. Next is engaging in constructive dialogue and partnership with civil society organization can also lead to mutually beneficial outcomes. Third important element is we have to important dimension that is being included in ethics is corporate responsibility. The corporations must take the responsibility for the development of the society and the environment. So ethical decision making involves considering the broad implications of corporate actions or stakeholders and the society at large. Now there are different important, changing ethical mandate of businesses. The first we will discuss about the evolving business landscape and the need for ethical decision making. The traditional view was the sole purpose of business is profit making, but it has been significantly challenged by various developments. What are the various developments? It includes consumer rights awareness, increased awareness. Suppose you are taking a product and the product is having some problem, you can always write to the consumer court. So increased awareness and advocacy of consumer rights have put pressure on the business to act ethically and transparently. Technological advance, with the rapid technological advancement, it has transformed how businesses operate, raising new ethical concerns regarding privacy, data security, and technological equity. Civil society activism, the rise of civil society organizations and their influence on the business practices have highlighted the need for corporate accountability and corporate social responsibility, because only taking the responsibility is not the sole purpose of ours. We have to be accountable to whatever responsibility that is being given to us. Government regulations, the government and the regulatory bodies have implemented laws and policies to curb the unethical business practices, thus ensuring the companies do not prioritize profit over social welfare. The managers must now incorporate the broader area into their decision making process, because whenever you are going for decision making, if you can incorporate this ethics at that point of time, it will not be very much difficult for you to implement. It will not be very difficult for you to make the people understand. So how can you incorporate it? The first one is through cost benefit analysis. Beyond the financial metrics, the manager must consider the social and the environmental impact in the cost benefit analysis that you do for a business. Shared value creation, Michael Porter and Mark Gammer have advocated for creating shared value, where business strategies align with the social good, just generating both economic and societal benefit. Non-monetary returns, business must evaluate return not only in terms of money but also in terms of social and environmental outcomes. So the the new business environment requires managers to navigate complex, because you have to understand the complexity of the business. So while going for managerial decision making, you have to also keep in your mind that it is not going to a simple managerial decision making. Complexity here is involved. So the new business environment requires managers to navigate complex and often conflicting demands from various stakeholders. Next is the stakeholder rights. The respecting the rights of the employees, customers, and society at large is crucial, requiring the inclusion of ethical dimensions in ethical decision making. Conflicting demands, the managers must often face perplexing decisions where balance the diverse and sometimes opposing the interest of the different stakeholders. So corporations have, nowadays responded to these changes in various ways. The first one is there is compliance with the legal mandates. Some firms have complied with new regulations, though they may express concern about their vagueness and long-term societal impact. Proactive measures anticipating the further regulations. Some businesses take preemptive actions to maintain competitiveness while adhering to ethical standards. Outdated corporate self-image. Many challenges stem from the outdated, self-perception that inhibites the adequate responses to new ethical demands that is availing in the market. To address these challenges, the firm must revisit their approach to stakeholder management and emphasize on ethical decision making. How it can do it? The first one is through substantive and procedural focus. The decision making should focus on both substantive outcome and the procedural framework of the processes involved. Now next is the ethical structure. The changes in the corporate structure are needed. Yeah, they are needed to strengthen the ethical decision making, such as appointing chief ethics officer and implementing ethical auditing. So you can, go for framing the organization structure. When we are talking about framing of the organization structure, it should it incorporates the point that there is changes in the corporate structure that is needed to strengthen the ethical decision making by appointing the chief ethics officer who will look after how you are implementing the ethics effectively. Regulatory incentive, the laws like US federal sentencing guidelines and Sarbanes-Oxley Act provide the incentives for ethical compliance. But nowadays, many companies are, they are providing incentives for incorporating ethics, but need to be complemented by deeper, structural changes. Environmental Protection Agency, that is EPO, the consistent changes in EPS functions have impacted the goal of environment sustainability, thus highlighting the need for stable and robust environmental policy. Next is the Corporate Ethics Officer. The high-level ethics officers, the very high-level ethics officer oversee the compliance and thus foster a culture of ethical decision making within the organizations. So in general, it is telling that whenever we are talking about the changing mandate of business, we are discussing about the modern business landscape that demands a fundamental shift from how the companies operate and make the decisions. Thus, incorporating the ethical considerations into managerial decision making is not only necessary to comply with legal requirements, but also it is essential for building a sustainable and a socially responsible business. So the focus should be on creating a shared value and thus fostering the ethical corporate culture that respects the right and interest of the stakeholders. We cannot avoid the stakeholders when they are a part and parcel of ours. So we have to take into consideration that while we are undertaking our businesses. So we discuss how these civil societies and organizations are impacting us. In general, it is telling that the ethical decision making of the firm has been treated as antagonistic to the profit maximization objective. So we may say that only profit maximization should not be the sole objective. We have to take into consideration the ethics, because when we are incorporating ethics in the businesses that we follow, then the business will be sustainable, then the business will be ethical, then the persons involved in the businesses will be ethical enough. So here in this chapter we have used different important terms and terminologies. The first one is the organizational wrongdoing. Wrongdoing of an organization is nothing but the waste and the discrimination, the legal violations that the organization has made, and the sexual harassment also one of the part. Moral muteness occurs when we witness the unethical behavior and choose not to say anything, whatever thing is going on unethically. Corporate lobbying is when the corporations and the firms in the country try to take action and influence the government in their own interest and carry forward the work. Motivated blindness, people see what they want to see and easily miss contradictory information when it's in their interest to remain ignorant. For other people, you raise the question. For yourself, you never raise any question. Next is the revolving door. It refers to the movement of the high level employees from the public sector jobs to the private sector jobs, and thus vice versa. So here in this chapter we have covered different important points such that we can understand how the government and the civil society organizations are also playing a very important role in implementing the ethics in the organization. So we here in this chapter have appreciated how we can incorporate ethics, or you may say that we have appreciated the point that ethics should be incorporated in the businesses. We have understood and appreciated both the individual, organizational, and the societal factors that are being included in business ethics. We have appreciated the triangular relationship between the business, government, and the civil society organizations, and we also appreciated the changing ethical mandate of the businesses. So we can say that whenever we are undertaking any of the businesses, ethics should be a criteria, and if you can carry forward the work in an ethical manner, or businesses in an ethical manner, your business will be sustainable in the long run again. Thank you so very much for listening, and have a nice day.